Welcome. I'm Alison Cairns, and welcoming you on behalf of the MGAA to our session today. So a little bit of housekeeping, just to let you know that the session is being recorded. So I'll add a little bit more about that on in a minute, but just so that you're all aware of that. Please can I ask the microphones and cameras are turned off, because it does help us ensure that we don't have any technical issues partway through. Regarding questions, very encouraging you to add your questions along the way, and ask if you pop them in the chat. What we'll do is we'll cover those off in the Q&A at the end. If for any reason there isn't an opportunity to cover it off, if your contact details are there, we can always get back to you separately after the event. So that's dealt with a little bit of the housekeeping. Also to let you know that all of our sessions are accredited by the CII for CPD purposes. Does mean that provided that this does meet with your development needs, you can record it on your CPD. And I think that's all of my housekeeping done, and we have had a few extra people join us, so that's good news. So that leaves me to hand over to Holly from Searchlight, who's going to talk to us about recruitment and attracting the best talent for the role. So I will hand over to you, Holly.
Thank you. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining. And I'm sure we may have a few more sort of latecomers in. So as we just said, I think we will go through the content, and I would encourage you to use the chat option throughout. So if we touch on topics that you'd like to discuss at the end, then please just use the chat, and then we will definitely have some time at the end of this session to kind of run through those. And we've got a couple of questions throughout. So again, just trying to encourage a little bit of that feedback loop, which is really helpful for me in terms of making sure the content and the levels of content that we're attracting is at the right level. So let's kick off. So this one's an interesting one in terms of recruitment and the current market and the trends and the, I guess, the challenges that we're facing within the sector. So this is all about attracting the best talent for the role. So if we have a little look at the learning objectives for today, so we're going to be talking about the common biases when it comes to the recruitment process. And then we're going to kind of explore those in a little bit more detail to ensure that we've got a fair and equitable selection process for all candidates. So this is where the link comes in with the ED&I piece, which is really crucial when we're looking at the FCA's expectations of actively promoting diversity and inclusion within your firms. We're going to then look at the principles of what an inclusive recruitment process would look like, and some practical strategies to attracting the most diverse talent that you can, which I know can be a real challenge, like I said, given the skills and the requirements that you may need within your firm, big or small. We're going to explore the best practices for decision-making tools, streamlining, the process as much as we can, and it all has to be proportionate to your business size. So when we talk about these things in more detail, try to always just remember it is all about being proportionate to your headcount and the need of the business. And then finally, we're going to kind of link these strategies to the overall employer branding and aligning that in terms of your values and your culture, which if any of you managed to join last week's session with Nikki Bennett, which we talked a lot about sort of non-financial misconduct and everything. She touched on heavily around the expectations of the FCA with regards to the culture and values of your business, and how that's heavily scrutinised and kind of observed by the regulator. So there is a huge importance for us to kind of actively manage that and police that all right from the start of the recruitment process. Okay, let's kick off. So common biases. I don't have these, do I? It's a really interesting question, because as we go through these, I think most people will say I'm totally inclusive when I do my recruitment. I go no with preconceived ideas, but actually as we work through some of the common ones, I would be surprised if anybody kind of selects that they haven't ever presented any of these, either subconsciously, or unconsciously. You just don't realise you're maybe doing some of these practices until you're in the motion of the recruitment and you've already made that decision. So when we're looking at at biases within the recruitment process. It refers to when you favour certain candidates or groups just based on their characteristics that are not directly related to the job role, the profile, the skill requirements. It's completely unrelated. And these biases can obviously skew the hiring process, and as a result, you are then left with a less diverse and inclusive and equitable process, which we look at the knock-on effects of that. But thinking about the candidate's journey and the business's journey, you definitely got cons on either side of the coin for not having a less diverse and inclusive process for doing this, and it's about minimising the impact and mitigating any risk for the firm to ensure that you're making the process as inclusive as you can. Okay, so when we talk about common biases in recruitment, so I've picked out the top 10 and we're just going to go through those. So I would just like for you to just have a little look at these, and as we go through them, I would just like you to kind of note down in your notepad if you've got, or keep a tally in your head of what ones you think you have done, you've been guilty of doing. And again, it's not, nobody's perfect, and that, as I was creating these slides, I've been guilty of doing this myself, So just keep a running total out of 10, how many, and we'll do a quick kind of poll at the end or on the chat to how many we've all done. And I would be probably surprised if the results are low, because like I said, it's common to sometimes present these unknowingly. So let's go through these. So infinity biases. So this is when you favour a candidate with similar interest or background or characteristics. So you have a tendency to look for someone who's got similar background, similar hobbies. So for instance, it could be they love reading, and that's your main hobby. So you see that on their CV, or you picked that up within their social media or their LinkedIn, and you immediately feel that connection with that person. Could be sports, for instance, football, cricket, rugby, tennis. You could see a lot of that being posted within their interests on social media, and again on their CV, and instantly, without even seeing that candidate, you feel that immediate kind of favoritism towards them. Travel is a good one to use. Again, if you're a fellow traveller and you love to kind of explore, and they've detailed that in their CV, and the recruitment agencies explicitly said, that's what they're really into and they're really outgoing. You could immediately feel that connection. Gardening and hobbies, I've tried to make this as equitable as I can in terms of the hobbies, but and also socializing. It could be, everyone's getting back into the office, the hybrid working. That could be something that you're really kind of hoping to gain in a candidate, is that social element of someone really enjoying being able to go out for food and drinks and socialise, and that's their hobby. And this will then lead you to hire somebody that will fit in, rather than a candidate that can bring diverse perspectives. So it kind of says what it says on the tin, but again, probably a bias that we've all done from time to time, from when you're kind of skim reading that CV in the initial process. The next one is confirmation bias, which is when you kind of look at that initial impression of a candidate. So it could be, as they step through the door, what are they wearing? Is their dress code in line with yours? Do you think they're smart enough? Are they just too smart? It could be anything from signing them in, getting them in the room, have the initial conversation around, do they want to drink? Or if you're kind of liaising with them over LinkedIn, or other job markets, then it could be even that kind of initial written communication and your initial impressions of that. And it could be when you're looking at their CV, so without even seeing them, it could be, okay, you've seen them there at a previous employer that's a competitor. That's either a negative or a positive impact. Does that give you a bias that leads into think, right, okay, we really need to see this candidate, regardless of all the other things that you've been presented with? Could it be what school they went to, or what educational level of background they've got? So are they at a degree level? Did they go to a similar university as you? That initial impression of their educational background could also really influence your decision to even pursue them into an interview process. And then location. I think this is an interesting topic on its own, given that we're sort of post-COVID 5 years and we've gone from remote to hybrid to fully back, and kind of doing that full circle. But It's interesting how if you feel a connection with somebody based on just their location, so did they grow up in the same town as you? Have you got an initial impression of the location that's maybe not so great when you've been there? So this can happen also quite a lot in terms of just scanning CVs and that initial kind of meet when they come through the door. But what will happen is you'll base your decision on pre-existing beliefs, as we've just spoke about, and then then they'll either be confirmed during the interview. So even if they get to the interview, it's highly unlikely that you'll be able to reprogram your brain to not consider those pre-existing beliefs as proportionate or as important as they should be, and they will cloud your judgment. Gender bias is pretty much what it says on the tin. So again, you are preferring a particular candidate based on their gender, and again, this is often unconsciously. So it's interesting that often recruitment process disproportionately favour one gender to another in certain roles. So, for instance, men are typically hired more for technical roles, while women are favoured more for communication and care roles and hospitality, just based on their skill set. But again, this can cloud your judgment in terms of actually casting the net as wide as you'd like it to go, in terms of making sure that you have seen the best quality candidates out there, and you've not just ring-fenced the ones, particularly maybe based on a gender that has worked before for you in the firm. The fourth one is age, so similar context. So you stereotype the candidate based on their age, and this could influence your hiring decision, such as favouring a younger candidate for, you might need a salesperson or BDM or someone within the office, an operations manager with a lot of energy. So you might already be thinking, okay, I need somebody of a certain age that brings that energy and that life to the business. So you're already kind of creating a cap on what that candidate's age could be. And likewise, if it's a really high paid, really skilled and technical role, you could also be thinking, okay, I need somebody that's that little bit older in their career, that's very skilled and very experienced. And again, then you're capping everybody at the younger sort of part of their career to not be applicable, when actually those have gone on biases that might not necessarily be relevant for the roles that you're looking at. So it's really about being sure that we are as adaptable as we can in reviewing roles. The halo effect is an interesting one. So this is when one positive trait of a candidate can influence your whole overlook. And you disproportionately allow that one positive trait to outweigh maybe all the weaknesses or the cons, if you're doing a sort of a pro and cons list for the application. So this could be, again, such relating to a candidate's initial appearance or charm, or their influence to be able to secure a second interview. And it's based on confidence and that initial approach, and it basically allows you to put aside maybe all the negative decisions that you've got on them based on their answers. So technically they might be not a great candidate, but actually you're really impressed with how they've dressed, their confidence, they've influenced the room, they've asked the really great questions at the end, but that technical piece isn't great. And actually you're allowing that sort of halo effect to come into play and override your judgment to say, actually, maybe they're not the strongest candidate for the role. The sixth is the horn effect. So pretty much polar opposite to what we've just seen. So one negative trait can then lead into a negative perception. So again, I'm sure we've all been there where you can come away from maybe a 60-minute interview and one comment can kind of really stick in your mind as, I didn't like how they answered that, or that wasn't as technically experienced as I would like, or they've never done this system, so that's really concerning. And all you think about is that one sort of element of a 60-minute interview. And again, this can be very common in terms of when we're interviewing. So it would be, you're answering for the 7 questions, great, like I just said, but one question could be poor. And actually what we're not doing is being very pragmatic and trying to unprogram our brain to allow that bias to creep in, because we put such an emphasis on that one question or comment that they've given. The name bias is an interesting one. So when candidates with a certain ethnicity or cultural name are unintentionally overlooked due to an unconscious bias about their background or origin, and this obviously could result in discrimination against a candidate for their background and their cultural background. So we talk in a little bit more detail about this further on down the slide, but It's surprising actually how often sometimes this comes into play, and also sometimes people perceive that there might be a language barrier, you know, if English isn't their first language, and then that kind of then kind of perpetuates into a bigger bias, covering some of the other ones that we've already spoke about today. But it's just basing a judgment purely on someone's name on the top of a CV, it, you know, it is done more common than you think in terms of that. So we're going to talk about that in a little more detail. The eighth one is cultural fit. So when you base favours on, you know, the perception of that person would fit in with that cultural value, and that the company's behaviours and desired, you know, the desirable cultural fit of the business. So it's excluding sometimes diverse candidates who might bring a different approach or a different valuable perspective that you might not have seen. And we are going to talk about this in a little bit more detail, because again, I probably kind of leads quite nicely on from Nikki's live webinar last week, that obviously culture is a huge FCA emphasis, not just with the DE&I sort of optics, but just as a general sort of non-financial misconduct, performance, and you know, the SMCR regime. So culture is a massive emphasis that they're looking at, and actually we talk about cultural fit and what that looks like, but we can also have a tendency to kind of start to create clones of everybody. So if you're on a bit of a recruitment surge, your natural reaction will be to kind of just keep recruiting what works best, but actually what we end up doing is kind of cloning the employees to be like-minded, and then you don't get that diversity, and those different perspectives and different people being able to challenge in different ways and communicate in different ways. So it really does limit the business's opportunity to perform in different areas. So cultural fit bias is a common one. Ninth is conformity-based biases, when so decisions are made influenced purely on others. So this is also, again, a really interesting discussion around who do you have on your recruitment panel. Do you mix it up or do you keep it consistent? Do you have someone on there that's heavily influential, such as, you know, the CEO, the MD, and ultimately, you know, if they don't like the candidate, then they get final say? Is worth just reviewing, actually, do you all have an equal part in the decision making? Because if someone is very outspoken about their opinions and influences others, then you do face this bias coming into play, where you can already make your own decision, and then you hear other people's concerns, and it will sway your mind because you want to conform with the leader or you know, or the main person on the panel. Again, which we may have all been there. If you're sort of the younger part of your career and you're sort of sitting in and shadowing, then this is highly likely going to have taken a part in your decision making, because it's that acceptance piece to feel and decide in the same way as your lead as well. So. And then finally, attribution biases. So this is when you the attributes of a candidate's success or failure are due to internal factors, and you allow this to essentially cloud your judgment and make a decision not on the facts, but just on the success of their failure. So, you know, how a person has succeeded or unfortunately failed in a project, for instance, you could, if the failure is due to external source factors, then you could be reflecting that based on how smart they are or how clever they are, or their ability to become well organised in their time management and their delegation, when actually there are other factors that would come into the success or the failure of certain projects or skill sets. And then likewise, actually, they've obviously failed at this task, or they obviously didn't succeed in this role because their communication is really poor. Actually, you know, they weren't able to lead, or they weren't able to hold the pressure of being in that much of a senior role, when actually maybe when you're asked in the interview, they were able to give those other internal or external factors that actually, you know, prohibited them from succeeding. But you kind of link those success or failures to attributes that aren't actually factually correct. Like I said, it's all about being able to reprogram your mind to essentially go into the process as open-minded as you can. So now we've done this, what I would really like you to do is just in the chat, we won't go through them, but I'll have a little look. It's just kind of proportionate of what we've got on here. So how many of these biases have you done before when hiring? And again, I'd be surprised if I didn't put 0, because I genuinely didn't think that that would be an option. So please put 0 if you think you've done none of those, but put A if you think you've shown 1 to 3 of those biases, B if you've shown 4 to 6, C 7 to 9, and then D probably 10 over your career. And I'm just going to have a little look in the chat to see as you pop those in. I'll give you a minute or two just to populate your answers, and we'll just see what the trends are. So give you 30 seconds or so to pop your answers in would be absolutely brilliant. Hopefully we've got access to the chat option within this background. Okay, so we're seeing a lot of B's coming in. Yeah, interesting. 4 to 6 is that sort of midway point. Yeah. Few A's. Anybody prepared to say they've done a C or a D, or do we think we're sort of in the midway point? Perfect. Okay. A lot of A and B's. Very honest. Well done. Okay. Perfect. So like I said, it might be at the start of this, you might have said, I'm not biased at all. I'm totally inclusive, and actually, you know, this is just you know, creating best practice. But actually, when we look at some of these, it's like I said, we don't even realise that we're doing some of these at the point of recruitment. Okay, so let's look at the statistics. I always like to pull off statistics when we're looking at why we're talking about this. So this is one about age. So in the total jobs revealed that nearly half of the UK recruiters considered candidates aged 57 to be too old, indicating prevalent age discrimination in hiring practices. So that was last year. Again, yeah, retirement, state retirement is becoming older, but actually we're seeing, particularly in the sector, that retirement age and early retirement or phased out is becoming earlier. So it's interesting how that 57, that feels still quite young, to be honest. And like I said, we could be losing out on that top level experience and talent that you could be doing when you're sieving CVs. I don't know whether there's anybody's ever done it, but if they're putting their school years and things, you kind of try to work back to see how old they are and what age demographic they might be in. And again, that could influence your decision making purely not based on their skill set or their ability to do the role, but actually, you know, are they the right age bracket, or do they feel too old to do that? I'm just going to drink. Ethnicity. So there was a research that was created this year at the University College of London, found that actually ethnic minority graduates from a lower socioeconomic background were 45% less likely to be offered entry-level professional roles being compared to more advantaged white applicants. I mean, that just speaks volumes in itself, and particularly when we think about that entry-level professional roles, these are candidates that have qualified, they're graduates, and they're trying to get within the sector, obviously the insurance and the financial sector and any regulated sector isn't particularly sexy, I always like to call that. So how do we, and we always talk about how do we get young talent, how do we create that organic growth? And actually it's about being as equitable and inclusive as we can, especially for those entry level roles where we can build from the ground up. And it's a really disappointing statistic to see that you know, nearly half of those you know, have been less successful than those with their comparators just based on their ethnicity. We talk about interviewing questions. So a study in December reported that 63% of UK job seekers were encountering discriminatory or biased interview questions, a significant increase from last year. So again, these could be completely sort of left field questions that might be very generalized. I once had somebody ask me, you know, if they're wanting a family or if they're preparing to grow their family. And again, we really need to think about the questions that we're asking. Are they truly relevant for the job role and the business and their success within the business? So whilst we like to understand the background of the person and that kind of cultural fit, which we'll talk about a little bit more detail, but it's really trying to steer away from any questions or answers that could steer your decision and create biases that are unnecessary. And then the bias around young workers. So a survey applied from mid-2024, so last year, found that 36% of Gen Z, so that's age between 16 and 24. So again, that young talent that's coming from uni, from grads, maybe apprentices, believe that they are faced with discrimination during the hiring process, particularly around maybe age, ethnicity, gender, and they're finding it really difficult to get into the market. So how are we going to kind of correct those figures? And then the FCA posted that a primary focus for them is to acknowledge the importance of diversity and inclusion. And in their consultation paper from December 23, they also just discuss the measures to enhance the DE&I in the financial sector, stating that more diverse and inclusive firms can support better outcomes for the consumer. And this is just about actually, it's not just thinking about internal benefits, but it's about that kind of consumer, that B2B relationships that you could be managing, key stakeholders, suppliers, brokers, introducers. It's the whole wider network around creating the kind of the DE&I initiative within your business. Okay, so what's the impact? So to the candidates, if we have these biases in place, it not only limits the opportunity for marginal groups, such as, like I just spoke about, the ethnicities and the age groups. It could also discriminate against older workers or those with disabilities, exclude them from job opportunities, and lead to fewer opportunities for career development and enhancement for them. It could also lead to frustration and disillusion. So, continuously experiencing that bias can lead to candidates just feeling completely discouraged about the whole process. Maybe they've always wanted to come and get into the sector, or they're qualified and they thought they would be able to fall into a job, and they've just experienced this sort of bias over multiple interviews, and it's just completely left them frustrated with the whole sector in general, and maybe they want to have a change of career or route to market. Essentially, it lowers their confidence in the recruitment process entirely. They want to face a world where there's no bias in that recruitment process, and it's purely done on their skills and attributes and experience and what they can bring to the table. But if they've got a low confidence, then again, that kind of perpetuates, and confidence within interviewing, as we all know, is absolutely important. It then also can obviously increase job insecurity. So whilst there might be discriminatory practices, particularly in the hiring and promotion decision making, it can create a cycle where certain groups are continually overlooked for those advancements. And it becomes stagnant in a certain area of the role of their career. And then unvaluing the diverse, talent, that kind of, it is what it is. They feel as though they miss out, and, they could be wholly qualified candidates to go for certain roles or promotions, and they're being completely overlooked. And then obviously kind of that cycle continues. And then what's the impact to the business? So we've talked about this numerous times in terms of what ED&I can do for your performance and your profit and your communication and your ideas. But in terms of just limiting your overall recruitment process to being those of a restricted talent pool, you're creating applicants, like I said, that consider a small potential for the role, instead of missing out on maybe highly experienced, diverse talent that could show innovation, creativity, and bring other perspectives to the workplace that you might not have had. The hiring process can be driven by often results where the workforce, where it's cloning. We've got similar backgrounds, we've got similar skill sets, we've got similar age, and we're creating almost a cloned workforce when we're talking about that. The optics and the employer reputation is absolutely key when we're thinking about growing the business, particularly if you've got high growth plans or ambitions to recruit. If people have had a poor experience of a recruitment or promotion and they've left, then that employee branding that we go to talk on is absolutely crucial. Obviously, the legal and financial consequences of discriminating is absolutely huge from an employment law perspective. It lowers the employee's engagement and retention. And then there's missed opportunities. Again, we're overlooking candidates that could clearly do the job and bring so much to the workplace, but they're missed because of these biases that are in place. And what's the longer term consequences of this? These are all quite immediate in the moment when we're making these decisions. But for the candidate, it's longer term is that widespread, inequality of employment opportunities, And there's disparities again then between the different groups, and we're not trying to influence the sector as much as we can by bringing new and diverse talent in. But the business is about struggling to stay competitive. So, you're facing higher turnover rates, and you want more innovation and creativity. You need different skill sets potentially for IT and AI and all these new upcoming trends that we're seeing within business. And actually, if we're kind of really isolating ourselves in that sort of thought process, then the longer term effects are catastrophic from a creative perspective. And then addressing these is absolutely crucial in terms of from both sides, but from the longer term longevity of the firm. Okay, so as we move on, what does an inclusive and equitable recruitment process actually look like? It's one that will look, again, as I said at the start, proportionally different for each size of firm and for the process that you go through. But I've tried to break it down into 4 clear steps here. And we think about the attraction, the interview, the selection, and then the reflection piece. So we're going to just kind of go through those piece by piece. So first of all, the attraction. So how do we attract new talent into the business? How do we reach as widespread as we can? So we really need to be clear on our employer brand. So what do we stand for? What's our messaging? What's our values? How do we communicate? How do we endorse or promote particular behaviours? And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. But that attraction piece, particularly for that Gen Z age demographic, it's a lot more about how they feel, that connection with the business. And so employer brand and employee branding is huge. You must complete your research on competitive compensation and actually be able to understand what the market is saying, but also, again, what your age demographic or what your candidates are seeking. So actually, if you see that this role is of a more senior pay, more technical, it's about being able to understand what the competitive compensation will be, but also remain agile in terms of if the right candidate comes along, it might be that actually they are interested in maybe a more competitive pension scheme because they're nearing that sort of early retirement, or actually they're just trying to get a mortgage and get on the property ladder. So actually salary is really important, and it's about being agile and I think having a really flexible approach to how you package up your deals. Encourage referrals. I think it's really important that if you start trying to create that diverse workforce from the offset, and then you encourage the referrals from your local networks, and you're already diverse workforce, then you're going to get more diverse referrals in. Focusing on your online presence and your network is absolutely key. So social media, LinkedIn, your website, your career page, etc. That's absolutely key to have multiple touch points, across the online presence. And then I would say a really important one in terms of just attracting different talent is making sure that you have highlighted career development opportunities and training and investment within the firm. Having that really loud voice on social media and having those success stories, because again, different people from different walks of life will look at different opportunities and see benefits in different aspects. So it's not just purely maybe a numbers game for them. They might look at what training you offer, and actually if you've promoted X amount of people over 24 months, for example, that might be a real pull factor for them to put their CV in. So once you've shortlisted the candidates, we go on obviously to the interview process, and step 2 is obviously thinking about assessing them for the suitability of their role. And so many people have different sort of takes on what a good interview looks like. So I've tried to break this down in terms of, again, being able to take snippets from this and implement it into your current recruitment process. So I think it's about having a mixture of different questions to ask. So behavioural is definitely, focusing on the past. So can you give an example when you've handled a challenging situation or a challenging client or customer? Situational is hypothetical. So again, how would you handle this if you had a conflict between 2 team members? Or how would you handle a complaint if you had one land on your desk? Technical is focusing more on the specific skill sets and knowledge that you require, and obviously make sure you always reflect that back to your role profile. But what programming languages are you proficient in, or what level of skill are you qualified in a particular area that's needed? And then the case questions are always really good, because this looks at more of the softer skills approach in terms of how they're problem solving, how they're communicating. So how would you approach this? if you've seen a decline in sales, or how would you approach this if the risk team declined a deal? And again, trying to get them to articulate different skills that they've got in different scenarios gets you the best result in terms of being really able to understand that person in front of you and if they'd be able to do the role that you're asking them. And I think it's about changing your approach to assess the talent pool. So what I would do is I would start off with a list of set questions, but it needs to remain agile when you're actually live and in the interview. So I'd say about evolving your interview questions because, review the job description and role, but then create very specific questions for those key responsibilities. So being able to adjust based on what that role profile is and what that CV is in front of you. It's about making sure you pair that up. I've also put that on the assessing the experience level. So you can quickly need to adapt the depth and complexities of the questions. So we have probably all been in this scenario where you sat in front of somebody and their CV definitely doesn't match up with the candidate in front of them. Either it's overinflated or it's undersold themselves. So you quickly need to think on your feet and have this baseline questions on whether you need to adapt the complexity or the depth of which you're going to kind of deep dive into certain areas. We always recommend sort of a first stage interview versus a final interview approach. And I think it's about checking the answers from the first stage. Do they need further probing? Something didn't quite add up? Do we need to get further clarification on an answer that they've given? So I would say sort of a two-stage approach is absolutely key, just to really firm up, who that person is in front of them. Do they have the skills and attributes that you think they do the role? And then that cultural add, I've added that in because I haven't put fit, and I'll kind of go on to that. But this is sort of a new thing we're seeing is where we're saying, can they add to the culture? So ensuring that you've asked 2 to 4 questions to assess their alignment to the organisation's core values. So ask the candidate to speak, about situations, and this could be personal situations where you're kind of trying to assess their perception on things and their communication and their behaviours and see if that aligns with yours. But again, it's not whether they fit in, it's whether they can add to the value. Next on this page, we're going to talk about the recommended stages. So like I said, initially you do your screening and you just review the CV or you speak to the recruiter and you just assess whether the requirements meet the CV on a very sort of black and white format. Do they have the essentials to kind of make it through to first stage? When you go to first stage interviews, I would say your questions need to be about matching the CV with the candidate, so making sure that you feel the level is correct, and understanding that technical skills and experience is absolutely where it needs to be. And throw in a couple of those behavioural questions to really kind of understand what they're like as a person and how they behave and how they interact. You from there should have a really nice idea of what that person is and whether you want to take them through to second or final stage interview. And I would say the final stage interview, if you're taking 2 to 3 candidates through to make that final decision, the next sort of set of questions will be around that cultural add and alignment. Can they add something? Can they bring something to the team? Are they going to be an extrovert and really bring that energy that you need? Are they going to be able to challenge the other team to think differently? Will they be able to have team cohesion and collaborate, or do you think they're going to clash and cause conflict? That kind of personal profiling will happen, and that's natural. Again, as long as we're conscious that we're not doing the halo or the horn effect where we're allowing one element to influence, is really important. Ask those sort of situational questions is really key. And then that self-reflection, I always like to end the interviews with actually having them self-reflect on how have you found these interviews, what you know about the business now, how do you feel the process has gone, would you still, would you be delighted to get the role? Get them to self-reflect during the interview, I think is really, really key, because you can also see how genuinely interested they are within the role. So how do we ensure inclusivity? So look, the HR and the marketing team need to focus on inclusive language and imagery across all platforms, right from the point of your designing your role profile. You need to consider bias-free screening. So we've talked about this in terms of, can you remove names from, CVs? Can you remove years in terms of when they qualified, or when they went to education, or when they got their degree? Again, removing those abilities for you to be able to do almost a faceless screening on the CVs, I would really recommend. And that's a really small change you can make. Even your HR team or your recruitment, you could ask them to remove that. So, you can't go on and look on their Facebook or look on their social media and then make a decision based on something that you see. And that would be a real key indicator that you're taking this seriously. Diversify your interview panel. We talked about this in terms of, do you have someone that's heavily influential on the interview panel? Making sure that you maybe have different age groups or ethnicities or genders is where possible, and just make sure that they've got that diversity when you're asking those questions. Always obviously consider accessibility. So is it always actually, an in-person interview is always required? Could we do a telephone interview to just reduce the ability to bring biases from stage one? So think about the accessibility to both you and the candidate. I would always share your ED&I policy with the recruitment agency candidate and the candidates beforehand. I think this again shows a very positive uptake on how you're promoting ED&I. Be clear on how the firm then endorses that, so you should get questions. And then always just review pay gap data to ensure gender equality. So again, if you're looking at a like-for-like role, just make sure that when you've got somebody in front of you, the remuneration package is competitive, but it's also equitable across already maybe existing roles and the genders within the business. How do we diversify our own interviewing approach? So firstly, we need to tailor our communication and language to each candidate. I've sort of spoke about that around evolving each question based on the candidates that are in front of you. So don't become kind of a robot yourself and make it a tick box exercise. Consider telephone interviews to screen CVs. Again, it just removes that first approach to be able to have any bias around appearance, dress code. It's supporting that process of actually just understanding the person and their skill set. Improve the relationship with your recruitment panel and network is absolutely key. So make sure that they are also promoting ED&I within their own business and firm. So where do they attract their talent pool from? Are there connections within the right areas? And just make sure you can strengthen that as much as possible. I always say to seek recruitment panel feedback from the agencies, or even directly from the interviewees. How did we do? Did we ask the right questions? Have you got any feedback for us? It needs to be a feedback loop and sort of an evolution to make sure that you're doing the best you can. And then lastly, this is an interesting one. So I would always challenge you to think about the essentials on the job description or the role profile and think, are they really essential, or are we just backfilling a role? And Bob did that role for 10 years, so we've just duplicated what Bob done. And actually, is it really needed, or is that a desirable, and can we be flexible, and do they really need this? So try to challenge your thought process when job crafting. The selection process, so making smart and equitable decision making is absolutely key. So I would say saying yes to just one candidate. You need to focus on the skills. You need to utilize assessment tools and tests. So I would recommend from once you've got your set of questions, creating a matrix and a scaling of 1 to 5, poor to excellent, and making sure it's very driven by facts and evidence and figures. And you've got a clear score at the end of who you think from a skills perspective scored the highest. Track and analyze that over time. So actually think about, are we also always making the smartest decisions? And actually, did we recruit somebody that maybe wasn't the highest figure, and the return on investment on that candidate is they only stayed 6 months, or the probation period wasn't great, so we let them go? So track and analyze your decision making all the time once you've started to get that data. Promote that obviously inclusive company culture from day one, and make sure that we've got that right from the recruitment process. I would implement the matrix, and I would get every single panel member to do their own scoring individually, and then do sort of a round table to compare and audit the scores, because again, you don't want that influential person to override decisions. And then just minimize that culture fit and then favor the culture add. So again, I know it's very, very hard to avoid the whole, I don't know if they're going to fit in, but just think about actually what could they add. So rather than the negative, let's think about the positive. What could they add culturally? What behaviors maybe are we missing that we could really do with? And then that reflection, I think once Once you've conducted them, you've got people in situ, what's the data at the other end of the life cycle that we could be looking at? So do you conduct exit interviews? I would highly recommend that they are the best form of reflection in terms of how well you've done as a business. It obtains key metrics such as length of service, source of recruitment, costs, return on investment, but also more softer skill and communication metrics that you can then feed back to your management team. Observing this over extended period could give you a real insight into why this is important, and why management and senior leaderships should be kind of looking at the wider gaps that you might have identified. Okay, so why is this all important in 2025? So why, recruitment's been around forever, you guys have been doing it. So why is this so important now? The stakes to get it right are super high. So the average cost of hiring an employee, this is average, is 6,000. I would say that's probably on the lower side in terms of the sector, but this is obviously taking all sectors. But yeah, that feels quite low. Vacancy, so again, average across all sectors, but every vacancy receives 118 applications. So there is a huge amount of talent pool out there, and actually being able to decipher between all of those is incredibly difficult. The route to market is constantly evolving. So as we've just talked about, 98% of businesses use social media for their recruitment. Obviously, LinkedIn being the leading one. Obviously, you've got LinkedIn, but then there's the recruitment driver in the background to be able to headhunt. That is the leading platform right now, and we're seeing a massive shift, and your recruitment agencies will use that to support their candidate kind of pipeline to you. 73% of millennials have found their current roles through social media. Again, you've probably seen a huge shift on where you get your candidates from. And half of the professionals keep tabs on company social medias to see what's afloat with their opportunities. And that's why I'm saying, those success stories are really key, because you can kind of try to move from more of a reactive to proactive recruitment model, where actually people are keeping an eye on what your business is doing and the success that you're having, and they want to kind of be in the loop before you've even got a vacancy. Okay, so how can we make the link between recruitment strategy and employer branding and cultural evolution? Because this is the key element. So firstly, it's understanding the talent shortages that you've got. So step into the shoes of the candidate and understand, what are you facing? Where do you need to bridge the gap? So your understanding, is it keeping up with the pace of technology? Is it balancing, making the sector sexy? Like I said, what is the gap that we need to bridge, and how do we communicate that within our recruitment strategy? How do we make the job description look as exciting as it can? How can we bring in technology developments that would tap into a different element of talent pool? So you need to think about the employee value proposition. So sometimes this is a total reward statement. So what can you offer as a business to employees that are starting? What is it? It's not just salary, it's everything that's involved. The value proposition does look different in terms of, nowadays we're looking at that 97% of employers value soft skills much more than hard skills. So thinking about that in terms of communication, behavioural, life skills, experience, that's valued a lot more than the more technical elements. And then the hiring manager, on average, takes 7 seconds to look at a candidate CV, and I think that's important here. They're so quick to make a decision. So do we even need to look? Again, think about, are you bringing in biases that might not necessarily be needed? 87% of business leaders now think that recruitment is a strategic function of their business. And I think this is where I would challenge you to think about this, is actually the stakes are high and the losses are high. So actually this should be a real key metric for you to be focusing on. And what parts of the recruitment process should you be looking at? So again, looking at your value that you offer, looking at your brand. How do you communicate that over your social media, on your website, on your emails? Looking at the application process and methods. So is it as streamlined? Is it as easy? If you've got people making decisions and applying and kind of scattergunning, or do you take a really long time to respond to applicants? That good applicant's going to have moved. So how quickly can you make those decisions and process? I've seen a lot of people using AI as a way of introducing non-biased decision making. A really good one's called Cognisis. but interesting model to work with in terms of helping them make really smart decisions on skill set and cognitive behavioural people's personalities. Becoming digitally capable, people want to be able to apply online, they want to submit their CVs. So do you have a careers page? Are you making it really easy? Do they have to fill in a form that's really onerous? Thinking about that multi-channel approach and really being able to just tap into different forms of the recruitment is absolutely key. Also looking at competitors' websites is important to see what your competitors are doing. The second one is what is your employee experience like? And I think this is absolutely crucial in terms of understanding what the new talent is wanting when they join the company. So you should be considering as part of this, flexible working models. Do you run a hybrid model? Can you do job share? Can you allow somebody to see the key responsibilities of the role and maybe job craft themselves? So it's a very holistic way of thinking about this, but almost reversing, so finding the right candidate and then working the role for them. This is something that we're definitely seeing more come through in recruitment. Being able to be really agile and mobile and adjust the roles for the best candidate out there, and that will allow you to be as diverse and inclusive as you can. That organizational agility kind of comes from COVID times when we really did see businesses just pivot, overnight essentially on their models, and that kind of still swings into play when we're looking at recruitment. So can you shift talent? Have you got people that are returning from maternity leave that might go somewhere else? Have you got somebody that's sat in front of you that maybe isn't right for the role, but they would be great in another role? Can you be really strategic in making those decisions? And sometimes it means taking a risk on somebody that might not be kind of interviewing for that role, but really being able to kind of show that initiative and place somebody in a role. Being able to give candidates purpose-driven work and a team is absolutely key in 2025. So people want to feel part of a business purpose. They want to know the values, they want to know the journey, they want to know the end goal. They want to believe in the business and they want dynamic goals and KPIs, and they want that constructive feedback loop all the time. So it's again, are you able to deliver that as part of that recruitment process and into the start of their career? And then lastly is focusing on the digital capability of your whole process from recruitment, onboarding, and then sustaining that employee for maximum return on investment. So can you onboard them? Have you got an onboarding system? Have you got a HRM system that allows you to manage that data that you can then export into a board report? You've got all that MI data that you can see how many candidates went through, what age demographic they are, what gender they are, who was successful, how long did they stay. You really need to keep that loop and you've got that trend over time so you can performance track what smart recruitment decisions you made and maybe ones where you may be allowed, common biases to come into play. It was a bit of a whistle-stop tour. We got there in the end. I was very conscious of time, so we've got like 6 minutes to spare. But after all of this, you'll be able to obviously identify the common biases and the principles of an inclusive recruitment process. And we kind of talked about aligning the branding and talking about interesting concepts such as AI and MI and all those other aspects. So all these slides will be PDF, and obviously this is a recording. As part of this sequence of webinars, there's other really interesting topics that we're touching about, which are on screen now. So I think we are at the end. So I'm happy to have a little look on the chat if there's any extra. I'm happy to hand back over to Alison for anything further.
No, I can't see any questions on the chat. So yes, I'd like to thank Holly for that session. It was really interesting, lots to reflect back on, and certainly in terms of the unconscious bias, quite revealing when you think about what decisions you may have made in the past.
A little bit, yeah.
I've got one quick question for you. Little bit of time we've got left. If there was one piece of advice you would provide for those listening today, what they could do perhaps in the immediate future that would make the biggest the biggest difference.
I would probably say, obviously I've touched on quite a few sort of quick wins such as bias pre-screening and things, but actually probably my starting point, if you were concerned with this and you actually wanted to make your recruitment process smarter, is I'd probably do a engagement survey with your existing staff and find out, you know, how they found the process, what do they like about working for the firm, you know, what are the pros and cons, what could you do better? Because that whole value proposition is really key. And I think whilst it's important to get the right people in the business, if your business engagement and your employee engagement isn't where it needs to be, then you could be hiring great people that will then essentially leave in sort of 6 to 12 months. And the time and energy it takes to recruit is absolutely massive. So I would say that would be my top advice is, you know, rather than trying to be reactive to recruitment, it's being proactive to ensure that the firm is as, you know, fruitful and energetic and meaningful as it can be, so that when you recruit people in, they're likely to stand the test of time, really, and add value to the business.
Thank you. I've just one last ask of everyone. I forgot to mention up front, but I did drop it into the chat and I've dropped it in again. Yes, I've added in the feedback link. And yes, all your thoughts is much appreciated so that we can keep these sessions relevant and useful for you. So I think that brings us to the end in a timely fashion. So yes, thank everyone for joining us today.
Perfect. Thank you so much for everybody joining. If you have any questions, feel free to just pop them on the chat and I can pick them up afterwards. So thank you so much.